Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching from. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet suburban street where Amara Johnson lived with his 10-year-old daughter, Princess. The neighborhood was unremarkable, modest houses with white picket fences and well-kept lawns. It was the kind of place where people smiled politely, but rarely looked deeper. Amara often thought about that as he watched his daughter play outside. She was his world, the bright, shining light that kept him grounded after her mother left years ago. That morning had been like any other. Princess sat at the kitchen table, sketching with her colored pencils, while Amara fried eggs and sausage. She was drawing a picture of them, a father and daughter standing hand in hand under a tree. "Make sure you get my muscles right," Amara joked, flexing his arm as he placed her plate on the table. Princess giggled and held up the half-finished picture. "You're the strongest dad in the world," she said, grinning from ear to ear. Amara leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "Don't you forget it." It was the last time he'd hear her laugh. By late afternoon, the playground was swarming with children. Princess had begged to go out, and Amara had reluctantly agreed. He planned to finish some paperwork for the auto shop where he worked, but instead found himself distracted, glancing at the clock every few minutes. When the phone rang, he knew, even before he answered. He knew the voice on the other end belonged to a police officer. A man's rehearsed voice. "Sir, we need you to come to Memorial Hospital right away. It's about your daughter." Amara barely remembered driving there. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and despair. When the doctor finally emerged, her words pierced him like knives. "We did everything we could. Princess is gone." The official report stated that she had fallen from the jungle gym and hit her head. "A tragic accident," they said. Amara barely heard the explanations. His world had collapsed in an instant, leaving nothing but emptiness. The funeral was arranged quickly, too quickly for Amara to fully process what had happened. Friends and neighbors offered condolences, but their words felt hollow. Princess's tiny coffin, white with gold trim, looked out of place amidst the rows of gray headstones in the cemetery. It wasn't until the wake that Amara began to notice things that didn't sit right. Princess's body lay in the coffin, her face unnaturally pale but peaceful, as if she were merely asleep. Yet something gnawed at him. There were bruises on her arms and legs, bruises that hadn't been mentioned in the autopsy report. He remembered how the paramedics had hesitated when he asked questions, their eyes darting away as if afraid to meet his gaze. At first, he told himself it was grief playing tricks on his mind. But the doubts refused to fade. The workers at the funeral home didn't help. Amara overheard them joking in the hallway, speaking in hushed tones about making it quick and not wasting time on people like them. The word stung. People like them. He knew what they meant. Black families didn't ask questions. They didn't push back. Later, as Amara leaned over Princess's coffin one last time, he noticed something else. Her hands, so small and delicate, had dirt beneath the fingernails. Panic gripped him. He turned to Clara, his younger sister who had flown in from Atlanta for the funeral. "She didn't have this dirt before," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Why would there be dirt under her nails?" Clara glanced nervously at the funeral workers, then back at Amara. "You're exhausted," she said. "You've been through too much. Let's try to let her go." But Amara couldn't let go. That night, he lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying every detail in his mind, the bruises, the dirt, the laughter of the funeral workers. Something wasn't right, and he couldn't ignore it. By dawn, he had made up his mind. He drove to an electronics store and bought a small hidden camera. The clerk raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. Back home, Amara carefully disassembled the lining of the coffin, tucking the camera inside and positioning it to capture the interior. It felt wrong, violating, even, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Princess's death wasn't the accident they claimed it to be. When Clara stopped by later, Amara told her what he had done. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice rising. "You put a camera in her coffin?" "Amara, you're spiraling." "What if I'm not?" He shot back. What if something happened and nobody cared enough to look closer because we're black? What if they just wrote her off? Clara's expression softened, but her eyes were still wary. And what if you're wrong? What then? Then I'll have to live with that, Amara said. But at least I'll know I didn't give up on her. That night, Amara sat in front of his computer, watching the live feed from the camera. The screen showed only darkness, the closed interior of the coffin. Hours passed, and nothing happened. He told himself he was being paranoid. That he should just turn it off and let himself grieve, but as the clock struck midnight, Amara noticed something strange, the faintest flicker of movement, so subtle he thought it might be a glitch. He leaned closer to the screen, his heart pounding. There it was again. A shadow passed across the frame, followed by the muffled sound of something scraping against wood. Amara's stomach dropped. He couldn't look away, he sat frozen, eyes fixed on the dim, grainy footage. At first, he convinced himself it was just a glitch. Cameras malfunction all the time, bad connections, poor lighting, reflections. But the scraping sound persisted, faint, distinct, and it made his stomach churn. He rewound the recording, fingers trembling as he dragged the timeline back a few minutes. He watched again, leaning so close his breath fogged the screen, there was no denying it now. The camera inside Princess's coffin had picked up something, his heart pounded as he forced himself to keep watching. The faint movement in the corner of the frame reappeared, subtle, like the shifting of fabric, and then the scraping noise returned. It wasn't constant, but it was there, unpredictable, deliberate. The rational part of his brain begged him to stop. It whispered excuses, faulty equipment, interference from the cemetery's wiring. Maybe even an animal. But none of it made sense. This was inside the coffin. Princess's coffin. Amara sat back, rubbing his temples as memories of the funeral resurfaced, the rushed preparation of the body, the dirt under her fingernails, the bruises that hadn't been explained. All the small details he tried to push aside now formed a web of doubt he couldn't untangle. Unable to resist, Amara hit play again, this time with headphones on, cranking the volume high enough to catch every sound. That was when he heard the voices. They were faint, distant at first, as though coming from another room. The recording picked up low murmurs followed by short bursts of laughter. Amara paused the video and listened closely. He could barely make out the words, quick. They won't even notice. His stomach dropped. He rewound and played it again, focusing on the background noise. The voices grew clearer as he adjusted the volume. Don't make it harder than it has to be. Just get it done. What's the point? They'll never check. The voices belonged to men, calm, almost indifferent, and there was no mistaking their tone. They were talking about Princess. Amara shot up from his chair, pacing the room as panic surged through him. He pressed his palms to his forehead, trying to make sense of what he had heard. It couldn't be real. He must have misinterpreted it. But the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Someone had tampered with Princess's body. He returned to the computer, hands shaking as he copied the file onto 3 separate flash drives. Then he transferred it to the cloud and emailed it to himself, desperate to make sure it wouldn't be lost. His first instinct was to call the police, but he hesitated. What would he tell them? That he had installed a hidden camera in his daughter's coffin because he didn't trust the system? That the footage showed shadows and whispers? They would dismiss him as a grieving father who couldn't accept reality. No. He needed more proof. The next morning, Amara went back to the funeral home. The director, an older white man with a permanent frown, met him in the dimly lit office. "Mr. Johnson," the man said, folding his hands on the desk. "I'm sorry for your loss. What can I do for you today?" Amara tried to keep his voice steady. "I need to ask about some irregularities with my daughter's body." The director's expression didn't change. "Irregularities?" "There were bruises that weren't mentioned in the report," Amara said, "and dirt under her nails." "Can you explain that?" The man leaned back in his chair. Bodies go through natural changes during preparation. Bruising is common. And sometimes residue gets trapped under the nails. I assure you, it's nothing unusual. Amara clenched his fists. That's not good enough. The director's gaze hardened. I understand your grief, Mr. Johnson, but I must ask you to respect our staff and the difficult work they do. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, Amara didn't wait for him to finish. He stormed out, anger boiling over. The way the director had brushed him off only confirmed his suspicions. Later that day, Amara called Clara and asked her to come over. She arrived within the hour, her face tight with worry. You're scaring me, Amara, she said as she sat down on the couch. He showed her the video. By the time it ended, Clara's hands were shaking. This is insane, she whispered. What are we supposed to do with this? We go to the police, Amara said. We show them the video and demand they reopen the investigation. Clara hesitated. What if they don't believe us? Then we keep pushing until someone does. They drove to the police station that evening. Amara brought one of the flash drives and explained the situation to the officer at the front desk. The officer frowned but agreed to take a look. 30 minutes later, the detective assigned to the case emerged, expression unreadable as he handed the flash drive back to Amara. This doesn't prove anything, the detective said. The audio is unclear, and the shadows could be from shifting light or camera interference. I'm sorry, but there's nothing here that warrants reopening the case. Amara felt the floor tilt beneath him. You didn't even listen to the whole thing, he snapped. We listened to enough, the detective said. I suggest you focus on grieving instead of chasing conspiracy theories. Amara left the station in a daze, anger simmering just beneath the surface. Clara tried to console him, but he barely heard her. The police weren't going to help. If he wanted answers, he'd have to find them himself. That night, Amara sat in the dark, staring at the monitor as the footage played on a loop. The voices echoed in his head, won't even notice. Just get it done. He couldn't stop replaying those words over and over until they were all he could hear. He thought about Princess's smile, her laughter, and the promise he'd made to protect her, and he knew this was only the beginning. Amara didn't sleep that night. The faint glow of the computer screen illuminated his face as the recording replayed for the 6th time. His ears strained to catch every murmur, every shift of sound. But the words he'd already memorized haunted him the most. Don't make it harder than it has to be. Just get it done. They'll never check. With every repetition, his anger burned hotter. The detective's dismissal only fueled his determination. They wanted him to grieve quietly, to let the matter go. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. Princess deserved better. By morning, Amara had a plan. He reached out to Clara, asking her to meet him at the house. When she arrived, he barely gave her time to sit. They won't help us, he said, pacing the living room. The cops won't even look at the evidence. So we're going to find someone who will. Clara raised an eyebrow. Who exactly? Everyone we've talked to so far has written this off as paranoia. Amara paused, biting his lip. The media, he said finally. We go public. If we can't get answers the right way, we force their hand. Clara hesitated. Amara, are you sure? Once this is out there, you can't take it back. People might attack you for it, or worse, twist it into something it's not. I don't care, Amara snapped, then softened. I can't let this go, Clara. If they covered something up, if they let her die because of negligence. Or worse, then we can't let them hide it. Reluctantly, Clara agreed. Later that day, Amara contacted a local news station, leaving messages with every reporter he could find. Hours passed with no response. Desperation gnawed at him until, finally, a young journalist named Julia Reyes called back. I saw your email, she said. And I watched the footage. A pause. There's definitely something strange going on, but this isn't going to be easy. Funeral homes don't just open coffins after burial without a reason or permission. They didn't have permission, Amara said quickly. I would have known. Then we need more evidence, Julia said. Meet me tomorrow. Bring everything you have. Amara hung up, feeling the first glimmer of hope since Princess's death. The next day, he and Clara met Julia at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. She was younger than Amara expected, mid-20s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. I want to help, she said, pulling out a notepad. But if we're going to run this story, we need to dig deeper. We need proof of negligence or a motive. Over the next few days, Julia started piecing together the puzzle. She dug into the funeral home's history, uncovering previous complaints of mishandling bodies and falsifying records. Amara wasn't surprised, but it still sent chills down his spine. At the same time, Amara and Clara worked to track down employees who might talk. After several dead ends, they found a former worker willing to meet, Kevin Foster, a man in his 40s who'd left the funeral home under murky circumstances. They met him in a diner late one evening. Kevin looked nervous, his eyes darting around the room. I don't know what you expect me to say, he began, fidgeting with his coffee cup. The truth, Amara said, leaning forward. My daughter's body was tampered with after the funeral. I need to know why. Kevin's hands shook. You think you're the first one? Amara froze. What do you mean? Kevin swallowed hard. They've been doing this for years, cutting corners, covering up mistakes. Sometimes it's sloppy embalming. Other times, it's worse. Worse? Clara asked. Kevin hesitated. They reuse caskets, he said finally. Switch out bodies to save space. Sometimes they damage the remains and have to fix them in a hurry. If your daughter's body was moved, it's because they were hiding something. Amara's stomach turned. He wanted to scream, to flip the table, but he forced himself to stay calm. Will you go on record? Julia asked, breaking the silence. Kevin shook his head. I can't. They'll come after me. They already came after me, Amara said quietly. They vandalized my car. They made it clear they don't want me asking questions. But I'm not backing down. Kevin looked at him for a long moment before sighing. I'll think about it, he said, then quickly left the diner. Amara wasn't sure if they'd see him again, but he wasn't giving up. Over the next week, Julia pushed the investigation further. She found records indicating that Princess's embalming process had been rushed and incomplete. The funeral home had altered documents to make it seem routine, but the inconsistencies were glaring. Finally, Julia published the first article. It detailed Amara's suspicions, the recording, and the funeral home's shady history. The story spread quickly, sparking outrage in the community. People began sharing their own experiences of discrimination and neglect. But the attention also brought danger. Late one night, Amara awoke to find the word "Stop Digging" spray painted on his garage door. His phone rang non-stop with blocked numbers, some leaving threatening messages. Clara wanted him to stop, but Amara refused. We're too close, he said. They're scared. That means we're doing something right. Under pressure from the media, the police reluctantly reopened the investigation. Amara watched as the wheels of justice turned, painfully slowly. Meanwhile, Julia discovered a deeper connection. One of the funeral home's owners had ties to local hospitals, raising questions about referrals and profits. The pieces were falling into place, but Amara knew the fight wasn't over. One evening, as he sat with Clara reviewing evidence, his phone buzzed. It was Kevin. They're coming after me, Kevin said, his voice shaking. I need protection. I'll testify, but you have to help me. Amara's blood ran cold. He agreed to meet Kevin the next day, but something told him the danger was far from over. As he looked back at Princess's unfinished drawing, the one she had left on the table the day she died, he felt his resolve harden. He wouldn't let her down. Not now. Not ever. Amara barely slept the night before the hearing. He sat in his living room, surrounded by piles of documents, recordings, and scribbled notes. The clock ticked toward dawn, but he didn't notice the time. His thoughts spun endlessly, about Princess, the funeral home, and what it had taken to get this far. The threats hadn't stopped. Anonymous phone calls still came late at night, their voices low and menacing. "You'll regret this," one caller hissed. Amara simply hung up and set his phone to record any further calls. He was past fear now. All he cared about was seeing this through. Kevin Foster had finally agreed to testify in court. His decision came with its own risks. He'd already lost his job and now feared for his safety. Amara had offered him a place to stay, but Kevin refused, opting instead to move in with a cousin outside the city. "Just keep pushing," Kevin had said before leaving. "Don't let them bury this." The phrase haunted Amara. Don't let them bury this. By the time Amara arrived at the courthouse the next morning, the air felt electric. Protesters lined the steps, holding signs that read "Justice for Princess" and "No More Neglect." Journalists crowded the entrance, shoving microphones toward anyone who looked important. Clara met him at the doors, clutching his arm. "You ready for this?" she asked. Amara nodded, though his stomach twisted into knots. He wasn't ready. He'd never be ready. But he couldn't back down now. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The funeral home's lawyers sat stiffly at their table, tailored suits, flanked by assistants. Across from them, Amara sat with his attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Angela Reed, recommended by Julia Reyes. Angela leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. No matter what they throw at you, don't lose your temper." Amara nodded, gripping the edge of the table as the judge entered. The opening statements were brutal. The funeral home's lawyers painted Amara as a grieving father who'd let paranoia cloud his judgment. They attacked the hidden camera footage, calling it inadmissible and unreliable. They claimed the voices were distorted by poor audio quality and could have come from anywhere. Angela countered with the facts: Princess's bruises, the dirt under her nails, and the funeral home's history of complaints. Then she played the recording for the court. The whispers filled the room, their casual cruelty cutting through the air like knives. "Don't make it harder than it has to be. Just get it done. They'll never check." Amara watched the jurors' faces as the audio played. Some flinched. Others looked away. A few stared straight ahead, expressions hardening. Then Kevin took the stand. His testimony was shaky at first, his voice cracked and he fidgeted with his hands, but as he spoke, his confidence grew. He described the funeral home's practices in detail, how they reused caskets and tampered with bodies to cover mistakes. "They told us no one would notice," Kevin said, gesturing toward Amara. "Especially not families like his." The room fell silent. Amara's heart pounded. He knew that moment mattered more than anything else. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The defense tried to discredit Kevin, pointing to his termination and suggesting he had a grudge, but Kevin stood firm. By the time the closing arguments ended, Amara felt drained. The judge called a recess, and he stepped outside for air. Clara followed, placing a hand on his shoulder. "No matter what happens," she said, "you fought for her." Amara swallowed the lump in his throat. "It's not enough," he said. "Not yet." The verdict came 3 days later. The courtroom was packed when the jury returned. Amara held his breath as the foreperson stood to deliver the decision: guilty. A wave of relief washed over Amara, but it was short-lived. The funeral home was ordered to pay damages, and several employees, including the director, faced criminal charges. But the verdict couldn't bring Princess back. After the sentencing, Amara visited her grave. The cemetery felt different now, less oppressive, though the weight in his chest had not lifted. He knelt by the headstone, running his fingers over her name. "I did it, baby," he whispered. "I made them see you." Clara stood a few feet away, giving him space. When he finally rose, she slipped her hand into his. "They can't hurt anyone else now," she said. Amara nodded, though the ache in his chest remained. in the weeks that followed, Amara focused on building something positive out of his loss. With Clara's help, he started the Princess Johnson Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to fighting discrimination and negligence in healthcare and funeral services. Julia Reyes continued to cover the story, keeping public attention on the case and pushing for legislative changes. The threats eventually stopped, but Amara never forgot the fear that had gripped him during those long nights. He kept the camera that had started it all, a reminder of the fight he'd won and the daughter he'd lost. One afternoon, while cleaning out Princess's room, Amara found her unfinished drawing, the one of them standing under a tree. He framed it and hung it in the living room. "Always together, Dad." The words beneath the picture echoed in his mind as he stood back and looked at it. Tears welled in his eyes, but this time they weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of love, of hope, and of a promise fulfilled. Amara stepped outside, letting the warm breeze wash over him. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe. Princess was gone, but her memory was alive, and so was the fight for justice she'd inspired. As he stood beneath the setting sun, Amara knew the battle wasn't over. There were still families out there, families like his, who needed someone to stand up for them. And he was ready. If you were moved by this story, please share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know where you are watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Tales by Omoh for more inspiring stories like this one. Thank you for watching, bye.